Okay, everybody, thank you very much for joining us and spending the first day of spring at lunchtime with us. Today's session is on program management, and in particular, program management professional. The title of this month's webinar is Everything to Know About Program Management Professional, PgMP. And throughout today, we will cover some of the basic understanding of what is program management, why is it important, what is the certification, and also give you some helpful tools and tips on how to prepare for the PgMP. We are anticipating about 30 people who registered, but many people did mention that they had a conflict, so hence we are recording the session for those people to listen afterwards. And we will make the recording available to you, of course, so you also can have a chance to listen to it. But throughout the session, feel free to ask questions. You have two ways. One is to unmute yourself and ask the question, but I appreciate if you could remute yourself just to keep the line, the audio very crisp. The other way is, of course, just use the chat box to ask questions. With that said, let me start by introducing myself. My name is T. Wu, and I am certified PGMP as well as a couple of other certifications. And the slide right in front of you right now gives you an overview of my experience. The way I look at myself is I like to think of myself as a bridge between multiple areas. One, I'm a practitioner. I grew up working as a project manager even back in the 90s and became a program manager in about the 2000. I became PGMP certified in 2010, and later I'll share a little bit of my journey there. And from the sort of the corporate ladder climbing perspective, I was the head of Global Project Services, a director running the PMO project services for KPMG. And that's where I decided to do more teaching. I actually started teaching quite early on in about 2003 as an adjunct professor, but became more of a full-time once I started my own company as I have more flexibility in time. So today, I am both the CEO of PMI Advisory, running a very specialized project management shop, as well as being a professor at Montclair State University, as well as a couple of other schools, one of which I teach regularly is in China, in Shanghai, China-Europe International Business School. And consequently, I spend a couple of weeks in China every year. Currently, I'm also a member of various PMI task group, the latest being Agile task group, but also involving the standard for risk, portfolio management. I'm also on the international standard ISO team, really a U.S. delegate representing the TC Technical Committee 258 for project program and portfolio management. So I really try to bridge the gap between the practitioner world, in which I still do consulting and run actively some of the larger projects and programs, but also on the academic side, on the teaching side, and on the research side. So a lot of the things we put together in PMI Advisory try to provide that diversity of experience and background, cater to what we hope the majority of the needs from the customer base, which is you. Throughout this presentation, feel free to ask questions. I'm going to move at a fairly fast clip, and the intent is to have about 5 to 10 minutes Q&A at the end. But please, if you have questions, jump in using chat or just ask the questions. Okay. So what we're going to cover today is the first part is all about program and program management. So you can see some of the topics that we have here. The second part of the presentation is really more about the preparation for the program management professional, the PGMP. And I'll even tell you my story. And right off the bat, I'll tell you of the 8 PMI certification, according to our understanding, and it does come from many different resources, PGMP is probably the hardest and likely by far the hardest of the certifications. And we'll explain a little bit why that is the case. And at the end, I'm going to put a little plug for my company. If you are interested in the PGMP, why you should consider us, PMI Advisory, to provide you with that training. So let's start with about everything about program and program management. Many of you probably are familiar with the concept of programs. And frankly, before PMI put together the first standard for program management, I started working on program even at the days at Accenture. And in many ways, the definition of program and project is sort of a very stretchy one. As the project gets bigger, they just started becoming programs. I think PMI puts together a better set of definition. So a program is a collection of highly related components, such as projects, subprograms, other activities. And when these programs or these components are managed as a program, they achieve greater value and benefits. I think PMI's definition, which I sort of paraphrase a little bit here, is a more elegant than simply bigger projects. And the way I think about it is it's really about using simple math examples where 1 plus 1 and plus 1 is greater than 3, right? So in other words, by applying a degree of synergy and highly effective management, you're able to achieve benefits and value you otherwise would not have. Example programs are abound, creating a new business capability. So, for example, even at Accenture days, I remember when they decided to call something project versus program. Program is closely associated with a business capability versus just a single process. Building a new department for your organization. Later, we'll probably touch upon one of my experience. The first experience managing a large program was helping a financial service company building a new department. And a department, of course, building a new department, which could be a capability, has many sub-projects or components within that. Implementing an ERP. Some of you on the call probably have ERP experience, and you know implementing SAP or Oracle or older days PeopleSoft. I mean, these are multi-year endeavors. Organizing major events. You know, when you look at a super event such as the Super Bowl, the Olympics, these are so many tentacles that they are beyond the normal realm of just a plain old project. From a program management perspective, what is program management? This is really the coordinated management of these program activities by applying the specific principles, knowledge, process, tools, and skills to effectively deliver that extra benefit in the results. Company often ask, why program management? And it's one of the more common questions I get on my consulting side, because a lot of companies, let's be frank, are still struggling with projects and project management. So, you know, why are we considering program management? Well, first of all, I think companies should have a fairly good disciplined project management before they embark on program management, mainly because even if you have the world's best program, you can't execute it on the project side, it's still things are going to fall through. But program in some ways is a different discipline. And successful organizations know how to differentiate themselves by having the ability to do something big or bigger than their competitor and do it well. As you can imagine, if you do that a couple of times, that becomes sustainable advantage. Program management is, in that sense, a strategic differentiator, driving value and benefits and become more efficient at doing things. Organizations that could effectively practice program management outperform those organizations that that have the minimal effective capabilities. As a matter of fact, PMI Advisory some years ago did a study on it, and we could actually show that on a curve. But I didn't include that curve here mainly because the data is a little bit older. It's about 5 years ago, but still very revealing. So one of the myths, just to debunk it right away, is programs are just large projects. So programs are more than large projects. The truth is that program offers quite a bit of unique value proposition. They are significantly greater than the sum of its parts. A couple major reasons, I think, trends, and there are many trends that drives the growth of program management. The three I like to highlight, and there's an obvious fourth one. The first one is complexity. I think today the world is just a little more complicated, and maybe it's more than a little. So that sheer complexity of executing ideas and the need to integrate and coordinate multiple processes, systems, people, and even people is no longer co-located or sometimes even in a small geographic location. Today, virtual teams around the world are becoming more of the norm. So that all of that drives the complexity side. The integration. Today, most business and most organization, even government institute, understand that we need to do more with less. And you could do that and achieve that by finding more integrated ways so you get to achieve that extra value. And then third, and I call that out here as a specific example, is a lot of regulatory bodies around the world. Egypt used to have a lot. Australian government has a lot of standards around project management. UK is another one. And even the United States is starting to get into this trend toward having more rigorous project program management by regulation. So for those of you who may not be aware, there was a law passed in December 2016, and it is called the Program Management Improvement Accountability Act, or PMIAA for short. And it really mandates the Office of Budget Management in the U.S. federal government to implement program management practices on federal project. Now, to be fair, they use the word program management, and in government, everything's program, so it could have just been project management. Nonetheless, it shows the government putting emphasis on this particular field. Now, by the way, I mentioned there's actually also a fourth reason too, and I think it's a natural outcome. But as I'm sure people know, we have about 900,000 active PMPs in the world today. And incidentally, when I became PMP, I think in about 2003, 2004, there were about 7,500 of us. So I was not an early bird, but not too late to the game. And today there are 900,000, give or take. And these are active. So if you include people who retire or no longer recertify themselves, then you're probably talking easily in the millions. These people, of course, are growing. And program management in that sense is the next logical step. Next logical step in terms of their career development, next logical step in terms of the organization they work for. Chances are if that's growing, it's going to require more complexity and more integration. And if they do business with the government, then PMIAA and similar legislation makes it actually that much more important to consider to be certified in program management. So program management is the centralized management of this collection of highly related projects. And I put emphasis on highly related. To me, a true program is where the failure of a component directly impact the success of the overall endeavor. And later I'll come back to some examples of that. So when combined, program delivers benefit beyond just the single individual project benefits or the aggregate of the project results. There are two additional attributes I think it's important to consider for a tight program, and tight means a highly related program. One is sort of the timeline. The timeliness of the components, generally speaking, has a high dependency. So in other words, there is not a gap in time in which nothing happens for a prolonged period of time. These implementation horizons are largely contiguous. The second is they are achieving a common objective, and that's a fairly tight common objective. We're not talking about business needing to raise sales volume. I mean, that's a common business objective, but there's a zillion ways to do it. This is about a business investing in one particular product. The product has many components, and for that product to be successful, those components need to be successful. That now is a tightly common objective. Program management is a differentiator, as I mentioned. For organization able to perform that well, you can imagine the sponsoring organization has now a lot greater ability to execute and achieve that success. And program management can and should exist at all levels of government, from enterprise to departmental, sometimes product level. So that's another question people often ask, I only work in a department. We don't really do major program. Well, not quite. Because as I'm sure all of you here probably have some experience, some of you are IT, I believe, looking at some of your profile. If even in IT, if you're doing an SAP or ERP or one of the major software upgrade, it's more than just a technology. What actually drives business result often isn't in the automation or the integration. What drives it is often in the business process that you help to refine, to streamline, to simplify, to improve. So these programs can exist at all levels of the organization. By the way, as people have questions, feel free to jump in. One of the major sources of benefit in program management is synergy, which is achieved by managing the interdependencies among the program components. Selective action could be alignment of desired outcome with the business objective, reduction or even elimination of redundant efforts. So when a program manager looks at the components within it, they may say, well, that project can be scaled back quite a bit because the other project is picking up those pieces. Achievement of greater economy of size and scope across many factors, from procurement to management process to governance. Right? So instead of going to 3 vendors to supply relatively similar material or resources, go to one of those, and you could get down the economy of scale. Coordination, management, and resolution of issue, risk, challenges related to scope, cost, schedule, resource, quality, procurement, all the other knowledge areas. Now you have a centralized management. And then the enablement of a variety of project management approaches, which I think is actually one of the biggest benefits of program management. So the reality is on most projects, it's actually hard to implement a variety of approaches, meaning a combination of agile and traditional waterfall on a particular project. And the limitation isn't so much at the methodology level, it's more at the organization and the skill set level. People just may not know all that much, or the organization isn't supportive of, let's say, agile from a traditional hierarchical organization. But in program management, because these components are coordinated, having the ability to line up the major milestones or the major integration points, and yet these components, in which are projects, can actually have fairly different methodologies go about doing it. And what that would enable organization to do is have that strategic flexibility by using program management as the overall umbrella and container, but within there, having different teams do what they do best, making sure, of course, the coordination integration is there. So to me, one of the bigger and probably underspoken and undersold benefit of program management is having that strategic flexibility. So let's look at closer what is a program. And we talked about it as a group of related projects, subprograms, and other activities managing some kind of coordinated fashion to obtain values otherwise that may not be gaining. It's better to manage a group of projects, subprograms, or other activities as a portfolio if the component do not strive toward a tightly related goal. So if the goal is increased revenue for a large company, well, there are many different ways. And yes, you could have a portfolio of revenue generating projects. It makes sense. But that's a portfolio, not necessarily a program. They do not jointly contribute to the delivery of a specific set of benefits, or they are only related by sources of support, technology, stakeholders. These are all relations. And so in the industry, we do see a slight confusion in some organization. And they ask themselves, should I apply program management? Should I apply portfolio management? And on the consulting side, we usually ask these questions. How are these related? What if one failed? Does it impact the overall program in a detrimental way? Obviously, something failed, it impacts the business, but does it kill the overall program? And there, it helps organization to determine whether it is better to pursue program management or even portfolio management. So the takeaway here is program is very tight, or ought to be very tight, while portfolio are also a group of related projects and programs, etc., but that relationship is a lot looser. So here's sort of the quick distinction between project and program. Projects are temporary endeavor undertaken to create unique product, service, or results, fairly traditional PMI definition. In terms of program, they consist of related project subsidiary programs, program activity, managing some coordinated fashion to obtain benefits otherwise would not be able to achieve. The standard discussed three fundamental differences, and the standard here refers to the fourth edition of the Program Management Standard. And by the way, that is the standard in which the exam, PgMP exam, is based on. So jumping ahead a little bit. The three fundamental differences that's discussed is one of uncertainty. In project, for example, uncertainty gets clearer over time. In program, not necessarily. It may, and you hope it does, but it doesn't have to be. Change. Change in general in projects goes through a change control board, and there's various elements of that affects more of a tactical value, while the program, the effect can be far more strategic. And then the complexity. Complexity in some ways is just at different levels. And the next chart sort of gives you that. And I'm not going to read this through every single point. It'll take a while. And I will make the video available for you so you could pause here, which is my recommendation to take a look at this. But you can see that the similarities and differences between the project and program. Now, one thing I do want to call out is even though the standard called out three distinctions, there's a fourth one I think is worth mentioning, which is the methodology. On a project, organization should adopt, or at least if not the organization, the project team should adopt largely one methodology. And the methodology could be a hybrid, by the way. But getting hybrid right takes a special set of skills. And it's off topic for today. We could talk about it another time. The program, though, can use a variety of methodologies, as I mentioned earlier. Essentially, it depends on a bunch of other factors, but having a strong program manager enables that strategic flexibility. So here you could pause and take a look at what are the similarities and differences between the project and program at a later date. And then also the complexity. One thing to cover on the complexity is that project can be quite complex. There's no notion that it's simple by any means. But what program does is one, it inherits the complexity of the project. It multiplies by the multiple components. And then on top of that, it adds a couple of other complexity that the project itself may not fully have. For example, on the issue of governance, on the need for managing the overall benefit, the resource complexity, scope, change, and risk. These are in some ways the additive factor of the various projects combined, but they can still make a truly big difference. And what's not even covered in this slide, and I often see that, is programs are typically at such a level that it also has political complexity, far more so than project complexity. Generally speaking, in organizations that's undertaking a program, they're investing a lot of resources. Programs are not cheap. They're resource intensive. So with any time when there's resource intensity, the opportunity costs will be a major factor. So by doing this program, organization cannot do something else. And those proponents of doing something else obviously now will make a political play. So politics and political complexity is definitely another factor. Let's look at the standard a little bit. As I mentioned, right now, the standard for program management is on the 4th edition. And the 4th edition has 5 performance domains. These are program lifecycle management, strategic alignment, benefit, stakeholder, and governance. And as you can see, the lifecycle itself is broken down further into 3 major phases. The phase for definition, program delivery, and then the program closure. 100% of the project and the component implementation happens in the program delivery phase. So if we were to expand on this set of box, then you could see project initiation, project planning, project implementation, monitoring control, finally closure. So 100% of the project execution actually occurs in the delivery phase. The benefit management is also worth explaining. What's unique about how PMI in some ways look at the discipline of program management is that it puts a lot of more emphasis on the results, the value, and they call it the benefits of the program management. And this is where the benefit management itself actually has a new standard by PMI, which is a worthy read for those pursuing the PgMP certification. But benefit management has 5 phases. That's identification, analysis and planning, delivery, transition, and eventually the sustainment. So this one diagram encapsulates a couple of major framework in the standard. One is the overall performance domain. As you can see, there are 5. 2, the life cycle itself has 3 major phases. And within the phases, there are even sub-phases for the definition and for the delivery phase. And then the benefit itself has 5 sub-phases to it as well. So this one diagram is actually a part of our cheat sheet. It's one of the most useful ones for you to understand sort of where in the world am I? And this gives you that drill down. So if nothing else, later when you study for PgMP, keep this slide in mind because it helps you contextualize where all the major questions, experience-based questions likely going to be. Somewhere it's going to be in these 5 performance domain and probably be one of the nitty-gritty details. And of course, in our training and bootcamp, we drill down deeper on that aspect. So that finishes the general coverage on program and program management. I see we're right on time at about 30 minutes into the presentation. Before we dive into more of the PgMP specific, let me just pause here to see if there are any questions. Again, you could unmute yourself or use the chat to ask questions. Okay, either I'm crystal clear or I just lost everybody. So I hope it's a crystal clear part. Let's look at the PgMP as a certification. And let me start with my story a little bit. I became PgMP certified in 2010. And actually, for those of you who probably follow PgMP, you may note that it was actually harder then. Harder than because they had a third step, the third step multi-rater assessment. So today, the 2 steps are application, getting approved, and then taking the exam. And assuming you pass the exam, then you now earn the PgMP. Back, I think prior to 2012, there's actually a third step. The third step is called multi-rater. So as you probably know, when you fill out the application, you're putting a bunch of people you know, which you actually may be audited. Well, in this case, the multi-rater assessment, the third piece, go back to those people and ask those people to rate you on your performance as a program manager. And if you don't pass that multi-rater assessment, you actually still fail the overall endeavor of pursuing PgMP. So obviously, you definitely want to put people who is more impressed with your work than otherwise. And you should always do that even today. But back then, a lot of people actually failed because of the third component. And it's not because people badmouth each other, not necessarily. It's mostly because program managers are fairly senior. And frankly, when you're dealing with a more senior crowd, people change jobs, lose touch. I heard one story, some of the contact they put on, frankly, passed away. So making it very difficult to finish that third piece. And I think that's one of the reasons why PgMP has never really taken off, at least at those initial stages, compared with the other certification. But today, there are about 2,600 of us in the world. I think the actual number is 2,570 something. And there are over 900,000 PMPs. So PGMP is clearly a round-off error. It provides a lot of doors for me when I became PGMP. At the time, I was still leading the global project services at KPMG. Even though the market didn't truly understand PGMP back then, and I'm not even sure how much they understand it today, truth be told. But they do know PMP, and to able to say, especially in my case, I have PMP and PGMP, to have a certification that's more advanced, that by itself opens the door and gives you that distinction and edge. PGMP, even today, I was just thinking about earlier this morning, we had a management meeting working with another chapter in PMI, and this is in Los Angeles. And apparently there's only 3 PGMP in the whole chapter of 2,600 people. So it's a very, very tiny population. So it definitely becomes a head turner. The skills on PGMP is quite impressive. At this level, you are working not just hands-on with project management, leading some aspect and getting your feet dirty, but you're also working with the governance, with the politics, with the organization. And if your aspiration is to become more senior executive on the business side, PGMP is a good way to head in that direction. Now, having said that, I do see PGMP as sort of the top of the ladder for the technical side of the for a project management professional, while portfolio is the top of the ladder more for the business side, mainly because at program management level, you're still applying a lot of technical skill, such as, let's say, risk management, schedulings, scope, and etc. The last thing that worked for me as a personal journey is it gives me flexibility. We talk about strategic flexibility of the organization. Well, now I'm going to be personal and selfish and talk about myself. Having these certifications helped me the confidence to say, you know what, I could walk away from a major corporate job, and in itself was a very good job, but I want to do something on my own. So having that certification gives me the ability to, and the confidence to pursue that. So that's really my story. And I'm sure as you look through these, you should have your story, of course. Here's the current state. And this is slightly outdated. I pulled the number. I think I forgot whether it's December 31st, 2018 or January, sometime in January. So this number is about 3 months outdated. As you can see, back 3 months ago, there were 2,561 of us. In the United States, we have by far the highest number of PGMP, followed by India and China. Both of them are very close. And in China, I know that area particularly well. As I mentioned, I teach a course in China. And last year, the government of China actually invited me to speak at a couple of cities. And that government agency is responsible for the PMI certification, including PGMP. So I actually got quite a ton of data from them, just anecdotally on the difficulties of the PGMP exam and the pass rate, for example, in China. And I suspect it's actually, since the stories I heard in China is very consistent with what I heard in the United States and elsewhere, I tend to generalize it a little bit, and hence going back to what I said earlier, that PGMP is the hardest of the certification. You can see how it distributes around the world. I took United States out, mainly because it's just so big that it'll just be one dark blue, and everything else would be in the shadow. But the top 5 countries surprisingly includes Saudi Arabia. So at least back in end of 2018, the top 5 countries are United States, India, China, Canada, and Saudi Arabia. Around the U.S. states, you could see the distribution of the various certifications. The state that tend to dominate in some of the certification, of course, as you can imagine, would be places like California, Virginia, and Maryland, which shows up a little bit smaller. That's where the D.C. is, so it's very government-driven. New Jersey, Texas, number 3 and 4, and so on and so forth. So it gives you a sense where the thing stands today. In order to qualify for the PGMP, you need to have a lot of experience. So for most part, most people today tend to have 4-year degree, but you don't have to. PMI does create a career track. And some years ago, when I was the director of outreach for the New York City chapter, we were working with New York City education, the Board of Education, on getting their high school students getting ready for the PMP. So PgMP, in that sense, is clearly a possibility for people who have only high school diploma. But generally speaking, you need to have project management experience to the tune of about 6,000 hours in both cases, and program management experience. You need to have more if you have a secondary degree, and you need to have a little bit less, but still significant at the with a 4-year degree. Combined, you need to have at least a minimum of 8 years of experience with a 4-year degree. And I would say it is truly minimal because at this level, you're dealing with a level of organization complexity that is just simply beyond project management. And most organizations will only utilize program management on very, very high stake or complex project. Because from the organization perspective, every layer of discipline you add on is a cost, right? In perfect world, if people know exactly what to do and no coordination needed, you don't need project management. You apply project management, and that comes with a cost and overhead, mainly because you are not sure whether these people will happily work together and to get to the result. So when you apply program management, now you have additional layer of costs. So that's why I do think that to have these experience is important. And for those people who's taking our bootcamp, for example, one of the questions we ask is if your goal is certification versus just learning. People do come to our bootcamp to learn and not pursue certification. But if you are pursuing it, you have to have these minimal qualifications. Otherwise, there's not much we could do to help you gain those experience. That's really up to the individual. As I mentioned earlier, the application now is in 2 phases. The first phase is just a panel review of your application. It's a pretty intense application. It has 5 essay questions of roughly 500 words each, for example. And the failure rate on the PgMP application, I think, is highest from my experience. And that is anecdotal. I don't know that for certain. And I only say that because quite a number of people come to us for help with PgMP application. After you pass that, you then go into the phase 2. Phase 2 is the examination. And as you know, you have a whole year before you have to pass the test or take a hiatus and wait for another year and apply again. And in this year, you actually have 3 attempts to do so. So if you fail once or twice, hopefully you pass on the 3rd time. In my case, by the way, one thing I didn't mention on my journey earlier is I actually failed the first exam. I still remember I applied for the PgMP sometime late in the year. I was at KPMG, and I got so busy I forgot about the test. And so by the time I remember, it was already like in the 10th or the 11th month. So I only have 1 month runway remaining. I quickly studied for the test, got myself ready, and at that time there was no bootcamp, 0 bootcamp. There were a couple of books out, and truth be told, they weren't even very good, but at least there were books out. So I bought them, studied them, got myself ready. And then literally 2 days before the actual test, I found out that I studied for the wrong exam. The standard I studied for, I think, was on the 2nd edition, and the exam went to the 3rd edition. At that time, internet being what it is, not like today, there's a lot more information out there. I just didn't know. And most of the book I bought, by the way, was some book were even on the 1st edition, so they were even off. Anyway, as you can imagine, I didn't do quite well on that test. So I failed the first attempt, and then I immediately called Prometrics or PMI, get authorization to retake the test. In this case, I think I took it 7 days later. And of course, in this case, I studied for the right standard, reading it, analyzing it. There weren't any really study material aligned with that new edition of the standard. And then I passed the test on the 2nd try. So it's not necessarily smooth sailing. So that was my journey. Some suggestions, our suggestion for people who want to pursue this. First of all, join PMI, mainly because it's cheaper overall. If you are a non-member, you pay a higher fee for the exam. If you're a member, you pay a lower fee. And even if you pay that lower fee plus the membership, it still come out a little bit lower. In that case, if you are a member, you are able to download the standard for free. Only a digital copy, but nonetheless, you now have a copy. And you could download, by the way, the other standards as well. Start to study for the exam as you wait for the application approval, especially if you have concrete experience. Then you should be able to pass the certification, the panel review for the application. And once PMI approves it, the 1-year countdown starts. And of course, then if you start already preparing, then you have a little bit more runway than otherwise. The examination and its environment are fairly similar to what you're probably used to with the PMP for those of you who have it. It is fairly rigorous in the senses that they watch and scan you for everything. The last exam that I took was the PMI at Prometric, was actually for risk management. And they did a thorough body search, rolling up my sleeve, my trouser, folding down my socks, and I'm not kidding. So they did all that. So it is in some ways pretty rigorous. But that actually gets to an important point. If you, as you know, the 4-hour exam is all-inclusive. So you're allowed to take break, for example, but the clock doesn't stop. So which means if you take a break and there's 5 people ahead of you, each of them getting a body scan and thorough check, that will take 2 to 3 minutes each person. So when you plan for the break, understand that it may very well take 10, 15 minutes, even though your break only be 2 minutes for a drink of water. So just keep that in mind as you plan for the test. The PgMP exam is composed of 170 questions. 20 of those questions are pre-test questions, and by pre-test, it means that it actually doesn't count. It's PMI's way of testing different questions and to see the statistic validation which may appear as an actual question in the future exam. The problem, of course, is you don't know which of those 20 are pre-test questions versus questions that really count. So you have to treat them as if they're real questions. You have about 80 seconds per question if you do the math. And this is clearly a quite strenuous test, especially if you didn't properly prepare. Frankly, you probably will take you longer to read the question, dissect the question, understand the question than the 4 hours you have. You're given some pencils and paper, blank piece of paper, which you could take notes, but you cannot bring anything in. So you could use it for jogging, doing some calculation, which aren't that many. And in our bootcamp, we talk about the brain dump that you should do. So you get yourself ready. And it's a very high intensity test. So it's critical to take and prepare yourself and come up with a strategy before you actually go into the test. So now I'm going to jump a little bit to the PMO advisory side and what we offer. Actually, I should say right before I do so, let me tell you why I think the PgMP exam, and it's not I should say it's based on quite a bit of data, is the hardest test. This is mainly driven by 2 reasons. One, program management itself is caught between the portfolio on the executive and the upper side and the project management on the sort of the lower side. And the program management standard itself, if you read the 4th edition, I am not completely sure if it's sufficient for you to actually pass the exam, even if you have a fairly good understanding. That is because on the life cycle side, it refers to most of the life cycles and the processes in the PMBOK, or it's very similar. So in some ways, the standard for program management, which is only 100-some pages, is somewhat misleading because the reality is you actually still need to know some of the project management side. You don't need a lot, but you should at least read it and become familiar. So that's on the life cycle side. And then on the strategic alignment side, the strategy side, it ties in quite closely with the portfolio, especially around the benefit and value management, which is more in the portfolio side than the program side. So in some ways, the test got caught in between the two worlds, and it could create a high degree of confusion. So that is one of the primary reasons. The second reason is for those of you who study the PMP, which most people with PgMP, I think 86%, I think by my calculation, of PgMP has PMP certification. So you can see there's a very, very high correlation between these two certifications. Is the fact that the sort of the basic foundation understanding is different. PMP is a process-based standard. So for those of you who study for it, you probably still remember, oh, there's these input, outputs, tools, techniques, 40-some processes. The latest PMBOK 6 has 49 processes. And, all at nth level of detail you have to go through. Very, very prescriptive, very, very detailed. Program management is PMI's first principle-based standard. By principle base means that there is a certain fundamental truth about program management that PMI expand on. And so it's not prescriptive. It is not the detail of input, outputs, tools, and techniques. The earlier slide that I show, this slide essentially captures all the major framework in the PGMP world. So, but what it causes, though, is for people taking the test, it becomes a very scenario experience-based test. It's no longer memorization. It's about application. It's about competency. So that also makes the test that much more different, and for some people, more difficult. So those are the two primary reasons that I see why PGMP is the most difficult exam. By my estimation, approximately a third of the people pass PGMP. PMP stands at around 60 to 70%. So essentially, PMP pass rate is double that of the PGMP. And I say by my estimation because there is no official estimation, of course, but this is what we see. So just keep that in mind. Now, we took all that ideas that we have, of course, we put it into our products, as you can imagine, our comprehensive PGMP products. So for the next couple minutes, I'm just going to very quickly talk about and sort of a little plug for the PM Advisory. I am currently working on a book. It was actually meant to get done before this webinar. Obviously, by saying coming soon, I have not finished it. So my apologies. I'll continue to work on this. I'm hoping to launch it by the summer. We built one of the largest simulator in this area. They come in two different modes, the flexible mode and the test mode. We also call that the exam mode. That could help people practice. The test mode, in this case, really is a simulation of the actual test. We do have a free version. There's about 50-some questions out there. We have a standalone version for people who just want to buy it off the market. There's about 800 questions there. And then for people in our bootcamp, and we have 4 different flavors, the full test bank is there. And for those interested in the full bootcamp, we have 4 versions, a pre-recorded version, and that's sell at a very low price just to get people ready. And you have access to our full test bank. A live virtual, we call it IntelliCamp. IntelliCamp stands for Intelligent Bootcamp. We try to figure out what are the most important information you need so you don't have to waste your time studying everything else, so to speak. So it's not, people always say, well, IntelliCamp sounds a little bit technology driven. No, it's not Intel. It's more standing for Intelligence or Smart Bootcamp. We have our traditional classroom, and we also have on-site classroom for our business client. So, for example, last year I did a major boot camp for Department of Energy in Washington, D.C. So those are some of the things that we offer. Just a couple more words on the PM Advisory. We are PMI REP, number 4172. We are one of the few companies that offers this fairly broad range of PMI certification bootcamp, as well as training. For almost everything the bootcamp, we actually have equivalent training, but we don't deliver training to the public mainly because the demand is low. So it is delivered to corporate clients. And you could find out more about us here. Let's see. Lastly, for those that's interested in claiming the credit for the PDU, here's the information. You should use this claim code 4172AWWOUA, And if it asks you for breakdown, which it shouldn't, it is this breakdown here. Plug in today's date, and I think you should be good. Are there any questions for me? We are now 9 minutes into it, so I'll leave 10 minutes approximately for Q&A. Are people still awake, or did I bore everybody to death? Going once, going twice. Okay, if there are no questions, then I'm going to give everybody, oh, okay, do you recommend making application before the boot camp? That's a really good question. It's a hard one to answer, so let me tell you two scenarios. We have a money-back guarantee, I should mention, in our boot camp. The money-back guarantee, essentially, for those who follow our methodology and who fail the exam, we will cover the retesting. And truth be told, we never have once ever paid for that. Our pass rate is 100% on the first try, period. Using our methodology. Our methodology, by the way, is really simple. The methodology is using our PgMP simulator in the test mode, which I mentioned. For people who achieve 85% 2 consecutive times within a 7-day period and take the actual exam in the 7-day period, we have 100% pass rate. However, for the money-back guarantee to kick in, though, you have to join PgMP Bootcamp with your application already approved, because otherwise we cannot guarantee that your application will be approved. So in that sense, for people who want that guarantee, they have to join with the application already approved. However, a lot of people do join before that and foregoing the money-back guarantee. And their reason is quite simple. Chances are have actually tried and failed to get their application through PMI. As I mentioned, the application has 5 essays. It is fairly rigorous. And PMI look for particular wording, phrasing, alignment, framework, however you want to call it, sort of their special sauce. And you'll learn that in the bootcamp. So people come to our bootcamp prior to the application mainly to learn the vocabulary, the concept, the framework, the way to process information for the purpose of the application as well. One thing that I'll jump a little bit into and maybe just go to our website is we offer a extended services, extended support service. For those of you who've been to our website, you probably have seen that we offer not just a basic boot camp, but the extended support. In our case, the extended support, I'm going to share the screen now, provides, and by the way, it's pmadvisory.com, PgMP. The extended support, as you can see, allows people to come back to our bootcamp as many times as you want within the support period of similar or lower bootcamp. So meaning if you join our classroom, you're welcome to come back to our class or join us on the live virtual IntelliCamp. If you purchase IntelliCamp to start with, you cannot come to our class physically, but you could join the additional IntelliCamp. So I think that's pretty fair, and you could see the support period. So we have people who came back to our class, by the way, 4 times, maybe even 5. So it's really quite popular in terms of our support period. But again, the people who follow our methodology has never failed. And because our skin is in the game, we put the threshold at 85%. Truth be told, nobody has ever failed after they achieve 2 consecutive times at 75% on our exam. So the actual passing threshold is probably at 75%, but since our skin is in the game with the money-back guarantee, we put a little bit higher to make sure you are more than ready. Okay, second question. Do you need to have title program manager for the experience? And if you have performed the activity without the title? That's another really excellent question. The short answer is no, you do not need to have the title for program manager. But if you do not, and let me say that, but I actually had a dispute with PMI last year over 2 people's application over that particular issue, is you have to very clearly black and white, spell out the performance domains, the tasks, the activities that PMI look for in your essay and in your project description or program description, to be exact. So you don't have to have the title, but if you don't have it, it is a disadvantage. You have to now prove it that you have the experience more so than a person with the title. When's the next two dates? And why don't I come to Florida? Mostly because we actually are thinking about, as I mentioned before, working with LA chapter in California. We're thinking going to California for some boot camp. It's really just supply and demand. The PgMP classes, and just you can see this webinar, our webinar typically have 100 people. This webinar is only 18 people. PgMP is relatively rare. I'm sure you have done your study out there and you know how many companies really offer PgMP. I would like to think that we are a premier provider, not only because of my background working with PMI, but also because of all the other knowledge we put into it. So if we think there is a great demand in Florida, feel free to reach out to me and we'd be happy to talk, but mostly it's just really supply and demand. Do you have considered PgMP was waterfall model or agile or mix of both? The short answer is PgMP itself, program management, is a more classical management model. I don't see it as a waterfall model. I don't see it as a traditional, as an agile model, meaning that the PgMP largely rely on fairly common classical business and management processes. As I mentioned earlier, in PgMP, this particular piece around the methodology, program management enables the variety of various methods. So you could even see that in the framework here. Right. This framework, the overall life cycle of a program, it is a life cycle, and true, and maybe it looks like waterfall, the fact that it has a life cycle, but Agile has a life cycle. And so in the program definition is really just figuring out for most time, do you want to do the program? The actual execution, whether it's traditional waterfall, happens in the delivery phase. At some point when the program is done or near done, then you need to transition close. So the close and definition from a management perspective are in every single work, whether you do it explicitly or implicitly. And here is where you have the project able to use different methods. So to me, it's really not a model, whether it's agile or traditional, it is more classic management model. Okay, thank you, Jen. Let's see. Okay, so I think it gives everybody a good sense of where we are. If you have questions, as I mentioned, you have my contact information now. Oops, going back to the final page. And it's twu@pmoadvisory.com. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, shoot me a question. I'm usually pretty active, and if I can't answer it, I'll try to find out the answer for you. Are there any other questions? Right now, we're on the top of the hour. Okay, thank you, everybody, and thank you for all the good questions. I hope everybody have a wonderful day, and hopefully see you soon. Take care.